Hello and welcome to a new season of Love and Citizenship. We're back after what feels like an eternity to me, and I am so very excited to be in front of a microphone again. If you are a returning listener, welcome. I'm glad we didn't push you away. And if you are a new listener, allow me to extend my warmest welcome to you on this podcast. I am Pran. I am a creative based out of London, and I am also the founder of the Writer Project, which is a creative hub that I started in the first lockdown while I was still isolating in Dublin, just with the aim of being able to tell more stories and build a creative community. And that 2 years later now has led me to the second season of this podcast. And if you missed out on the first season, I would highly encourage that you check out the 10 episodes that we put out before. It's a backlog of episodes and they really are incredible. Of course, I am biased and all of this bias will creep into every single one of these episodes because I truly think we captured lightning in a bottle. So before we begin with the episode, there is a big announcement, and that announcement is that I am starting a Patreon. Now, I have forever identified as a creative, but it's only in the last couple of years that I've started to really take that seriously and do something with, whether that be writing proses, short stories, poems, whatever have you, but also that extends to this podcast. Now, Patreon, for those of you that don't know, is an online platform that allows you, the listener or the patron of my art, to support my creativity and get early access to a lot of the content that I put out. Now, I will link my Patreon down below, so do check it out. And another benefit for all the podcast listeners is that you get early access to the episodes. So if that is incentive enough, do consider subscribing. There are 3 different tiers, and I will leave that down below. But you can also look it up at patreon.com/Pranav Darshan. So have a look and would love to see a lot of you there. But back to what this episode is all about. This is an introductory episode to the new season of Love and Citizenship. Now, there is a lot to be said about this new season. I knew that I wanted to do a second season as soon as I wrapped up the last set of interviews for the first. And I knew that I wanted to go deeper into the exploration of vulnerability and bring this podcast to a place where I could explore the depth of not just my own experience, but also the person that was sitting in front of me. And not to say that there wasn't much of that in the first season, but like any sequel, you always want to go a bit bigger and do things a bit better. And so much of that first season was me finding my own 2 feet as a creative, as a podcast host and a producer. I look and listen to those first episodes and how I went about them. And I'm filled with nothing but extreme amounts of gratitude for my guests who allowed me that space to kind of figure it all out. And my community, my creative community, and everybody who chose to listen and leave a feedback, letting me know of things that needed improving and the ways that I could make the podcast better. So before anything else, a big gratitude to all my guests, but also our listeners from last season. And this is where we come to the second season. The second season in many ways is a culmination of everything that I've learned starting this podcast, all the feedback that I've received in that time, but also just the life that has happened since. So I've emigrated. I have emigrated since the last season, and there are many challenges that have come with that. But I think the biggest one for me would be my dog Maggie was my co-host for last season. And although I will not miss editing out the sound of her snores, they have now been replaced by the sounds of passing train and the odd siren every now and then. So for the uninitiated, if you're wondering how this podcast works, every week I sit down with a new guest and engage in a very vulnerable conversation that seeks to explore their lived experience. And there's a short first episode, followed by the rest of the season, and the closing remarks, if you will. So this is going to be the shortest episode for the entire podcast, and that's probably for the best, because as interesting as I think I am, the conversations that are about to happen on this podcast are by far some of my personal highlights over the last year. And I have been doing pre-production work for this season since the last one wrapped up. And I knew I wanted to do a bigger and better job of what we'd already achieved. And a lot of those early months of pre-production was going back to the drawing board, learning new skills. I've completely changed the platform that I use for editing, but also on the more practical sides of actually being in a conversation, how to better prepare my guest for the conversation, and also making sure that throughout the process, the guest is comfortable having a conversation, because a lot of these conversations, as you will soon be privy to, do really tug at the strings. And I have left a lot of these episodes kind of really having to sit with myself and then checking in with my guest and having a conversation about how that conversation felt for everybody involved. It's a involved process. It's exactly how I love doing it. And I genuinely cannot wait for a lot of you to hear the episodes that we have down the road, which, of course, at the risk of spoiling or kind of just teasing a bit of what you can expect, there are conversations coming over the next 2 weeks at the very least. The first of which is a conversation with somebody I went to boarding school with. And with every episode that we do, there is an introduction for the guest that I record. And I don't think I've struggled as much as I did to record Ronit's introduction. It's an incredible episode about how two men raised in a very toxic environment can come out of it, and how we both reflected on our journeys. And the caveat to all of this is it's only the experience of two people. The conversation after that is with Kenny, somebody that I was very lucky to work with in college. And Kenny and I fostered this friendship just based off the shenanigans at work. But also Kenny is just this deeply incredible human being that I feel so lucky to have crossed paths with. And we sat down and had a conversation about our identities, our race, how we show up to the world and how the world receives us. And it's a conversation, again, there is a version of this conversation that I had with my friend Aisha in season 1. And that conversation gave me so much more to think about. And the conversation with Kenny is no different. I just feel incredibly privileged to be in a position where I could be part of that conversation and I could help facilitate it. And it's an episode that I'm really excited about. There are a lot more episodes down the road. There's more episodes about my time on boarding school through the lens of somebody that experienced it in a completely different way. There are episodes diving deep into questions of masculinity, questions around sexual identity, relationship norms. There's conversations of love, because obviously love is part of this podcast. There are conversations about love, the different types of love, how we show up as lovers, how we show up as people who love. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of heart in all of this. And I often find that it's quite hard to put a label, like a blanket statement of what each season is. But if we're going by, and if I can try and attempt to put a label on this, I would say the first season was a lot about finding your voice, finding yourself, who we are. And the second season, in every single way, is about giving light, giving voice to those parts of ourselves. It's about acknowledging yourself. It's about showing up as your honest expression. Now, the podcast itself, there's a new episode out every week. If you're on Patreon, you get early access to the episodes. But we are doing episodes till the first week of August. So there's a lot of episodes down the road. And man, finding the people and finding conversations for this season was in equal measure frustrating, but also exciting. So the cop-out for season 1, and this is, I don't know whether you're supposed to say these things, but for season 1, it was so much easier because I had already a community of creatives or friends who were willing to have these conversations and just needed me to reach out to them and be like, hey, how about we sit in front of a microphone and talk about these things? And so that side of it was quite easy. And I didn't necessarily have to send out many cold emails. The only one that I can think of that I sent last season was to Ella Dawson, who is an absolute trooper of a human. Ella, if you're listening to this, absolutely adore you. And I cannot thank you enough for coming onto the podcast. Again, it blew my mind how I could just reach out to somebody that I'd followed for so long and appreciated the writing of for so long through an email. And they said yes. And that yes emboldened me. So this season is a departure in that I broke my comfort zone and sent 100 cold emails. That's right. I sent 100 cold emails, out of which 30 got back to me. And those 30 were extremely kind, extremely generous. A lot of it was just the schedule's not aligning or the timing's not working out. But of all the ones that I got to manage to sit in front of and have a conversation, again, for every single no, there's also a yes that came back, and I am eternally grateful. But this season, again, I cannot stress this enough, and a lot of this will be me sounding very repetitive. It's building on everything that season 1 managed to do. And it's terrifying. It is truly terrifying putting your heart into something that you truly believe in and getting all that rejection. It reminds me of when I was applying to universities. So for anybody listening, I am a history and political science graduate who has now started training as a psychotherapist, which wasn't always the case. And the transition is more difficult than you would imagine. And it seemed even worse at the time. So I left and graduated university, and I was in the workforce. I was working a 9 to 5. And at the same time, I was thinking of transitioning to a course that would allow me to be either a psychiatrist, psychologist, or psychotherapist. Basically, I wanted to work in mental health. And I applied to 6 universities, 6 or 7, and got a rejection from each one of them, one after the other. And I know this isn't just my experience. I know a lot of other people go through this, and I'm sure some of you listening in have experienced how crushing it can be for you to be denied your dreams. And I have since learned how it is a redirection and not a rejection. I remember the exact day or the exact moment that hit me when I was on a tram and I was on my way to see my therapist at the time. And it used to be 7 stops from where I used to live. And so the doors closed on the tram at the stop, and then they opened, and then we moved to the other stop and they opened and closed, and I never got out on them. And I remember as that tram was going, I just remember thinking to myself, that isn't a door I'm meant to walk through. That's not my stop. And there is a whole world of wisdom on rejection and redirection and putting your intention out there. But if you take anything from today, I just hope you believe in the power of putting the intention out there. I say this in the first episode that I ever recorded for the podcast. I had no clue if the writer project would work. I still don't know if it will, but I have to believe that there are other people out there who just want to nerd out over creativity, who just want to build connections, and who have stories, whether that is on a podcast or whether that is on a literary format. There are people who will forever want to engage with creativity and with honest and vulnerable stories in those frames and spaces. So here I am recording an introductory episode for this 2nd season of Love and Citizenship. I really appreciate you tuning in, and please do consider subscribing to this podcast wherever you're listening. If you like what we do, please do check out the backlog of episodes and leave us a review. That is all from me. Next week's episode is going to be out on Wednesday and will feature my wonderful, wonderful friend, Ronit Borpajari. Till then, I hope you're well. I hope you're safe. I hope you're doing the things that bring you joy and are fulfilling you. And really, I appreciate you being here, and I will catch you next week.